People come onto my stage carrying all kinds of stories, but every so often someone walks in with a narrative so firmly glued to their identity that prying it loose feels like trying to lift a house with your bare hands. That was the case with a young man named Trevor. The moment he sat across from me, I saw it in his eyes, a determination to convince the world that he was the wounded one, the misunderstood one, the one everyone else had wronged. He didn't sit like someone asking for help. He sat like someone preparing to defend a thesis he'd memorized word for word. He opened his mouth before I even asked my first question. He said he had been betrayed by his entire family, sabotaged by his coworkers, and pushed to the edge by people who claimed they cared about him. His voice carried that combination of exhaustion and righteousness that tells me a person has been rehearsing a story for so long they've stopped noticing the cracks in the foundation. I didn't interrupt him. I let him talk. Sometimes the first few sentences someone gives you tell you everything about the world they've built inside their head. Trevor didn't describe conflicts. He described conspiracies. He didn't describe disagreements. He described attacks. And the more he spoke, the more I recognized that he wasn't just trying to explain his pain, he was trying to justify it. He wanted to make sure I understood that he had been the victim in every chapter of his life. He needed me to see that he wasn't the problem, everyone else was. But what struck me most wasn't the anger, it was the fear underneath it. You can hear fear when someone speaks, even if they don't mention it. It shows up in the way they rush their words, or the way their shoulders tighten, or the way their voice gets sharp and brittle at the edges. Trevor carried fear like a shadow he didn't want anyone to notice. And that fear had shaped his story long before he ever sat across from me. As he talked, I glanced over at his parents sitting on the opposite side of the stage. His mother looked like someone who had cried so often she no longer needed tissues. She simply let the tears fall as they came. His father sat stiffly, not in anger, but in restraint, like a man who'd said everything he knew how to say and still didn't know how to reach his son. I could see years of exhaustion carved into both of their faces. Families don't show up on my stage because of one bad moment. They show up because of years of moments layered on top of each other until no one knows where the original wound began. I asked Trevor to tell me what brought him to the show. He said his parents wanted to fix him. He said they claimed he had anger issues, communication problems, and a tendency to lash out. He denied all of it. He said they were exaggerating to make him look unstable. He insisted he was emotionally calm and reasonable, and that the only reason he ever raised his voice was because no one listened to him. That contradiction told me more than he realized. People who insist they are the only calm ones in a world full of irrational people are often living inside a narrative they built to protect themselves. And Trevor had built his carefully, brick by brick, justification by justification. I asked his parents what they believed the issue was. His mother said Trevor had a pattern of turning every disagreement into a declaration of war. His father said Trevor didn't know how to take responsibility for his actions. They said he twisted conversations, reinterpreted intentions, and always found a way to make himself the victim, regardless of the situation. Trevor scoffed, shaking his head. He said they were dramatic and controlling and that they couldn't stand the idea of him having his own opinions. I listened to his tone, watched his body language, and looked for the small tells that people can't hide. His knee bounced. His fingers gripped the armrest. His jaw flexed every few seconds. Those small movements told me he wasn't confident. He was bracing himself. I took him back to the beginning. I asked him when he first felt that the world was against him. He said middle school. He said kids made fun of him. He said teachers didn't understand him. He said he never felt like he fit in anywhere, not at home, not at school, not even with friends he tried to impress. That was the first honest moment he gave me. It was subtle, almost accidental, but it was there. Isolation leaves a mark. Feeling misunderstood at a young age can lay a foundation of defensiveness that follows a person for decades. And when that defensiveness settles in, every experience gets filtered through it. A suggestion becomes an insult. A boundary becomes rejection. A disagreement becomes betrayal. Trevor had learned to protect himself early, but the method he used, blame, eventually took over his identity. I asked his parents what Trevor had been like as a child. His mother said he was sensitive, bright, and eager to please, but he took criticism harder than most kids. Even small corrections devastated him. His father said Trevor seemed to experience emotions in extremes. Joy was overwhelming, frustration was explosive, disappointment was crushing. That kind of temperament without support and guidance can turn into a belief that everyone else is too harsh, too demanding, too unfair. Trevor jumped in to defend himself before his father even finished speaking. He said they were rewriting history. He said they never supported him, never praised him, never understood him. But the intensity of his reaction told me the opposite. He remembered those moments vividly, and they hurt him far more than he wanted to admit. As I guided the conversation deeper, I began noticing a pattern. Every story Trevor told ended the same way with him as the victim of someone else's actions. His boss singled him out. His sister criticized him unfairly. His girlfriend left him because she couldn't handle honesty. His friends drifted away because they couldn't appreciate someone real. The common denominator in every situation wasn't the people around him, it was the way he interpreted their words and actions. But I didn't confront that directly, not yet. Confrontation too early leads to shutdown. I needed Trevor to hear himself first, to listen to the shape of his own narrative, to feel the weight of the pattern he'd been carrying. And as he spoke, I could see that even he was starting to recognize something repeating, though he hid that recognition behind frustration. I asked him what he wanted from life. He said he wanted respect, he wanted to be heard, he wanted to be understood. And then he said the sentence that told me exactly where the turning point of this story would eventually come. He said, "I'm not the problem. The problem is that everyone treats me like I am." I didn't react outwardly, but inside I knew that sentence would be the pressure point. Because the moment someone insists they're never the problem is usually the moment they are the problem but can't bear to look in that mirror. Trevor wasn't malicious. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't selfish. He was wounded. And wounded people often build entire worlds out of the belief that everyone else is responsible for the pain they can't face. The real work was going to be helping him see that being the victim in every story wasn't protecting him, it was imprisoning him. And he had no idea yet that the shift he needed was coming. Trevor didn't realize how much he was revealing with every example he gave. He thought he was building a case brick by brick, proving beyond a doubt that he had been wronged by everyone around him. But what he was really doing was showing me how deeply entrenched he was in a narrative that kept him from ever examining his own role in the chaos of his life. That's the thing about people who cling to victimhood, not because they're manipulative, but because they're hurting. They don't see how much power they've given away by insisting they have none. I asked Trevor to walk me through the most recent blow-up with his family. He said his parents ambushed him during dinner. He said they attacked him, shamed him, and told him he was the reason everyone was miserable. He said they painted him as unstable. He insisted that every word they said was exaggerated or distorted. He described the scene like a courtroom drama where he stood alone while everyone pointed fingers. His mother shook her head slowly while he spoke, but not in anger. It was the kind of slow, weary motion that comes from a person who has told the truth so many times they've run out of new ways to say it. When I asked her to describe that same night, her voice was soft, almost apologetic. She said they'd been worried about Trevor for months. She said he'd quit another job after claiming his coworkers were plotting against him. She said he hadn't spoken to his sister in almost a year because he believed she made a joke at his expense during a holiday gathering. She said they had hoped the dinner conversation would be calm, supportive, maybe even productive. But the moment they expressed concern, Trevor exploded. His father added that they didn't raise their voices. They didn't attack him. They simply asked if he would consider talking to a therapist again. That one request, according to them, was enough to make him accuse them of conspiring to get rid of him. Trevor rolled his eyes as they spoke, muttering that they always twist things. But the tightness in his jaw told me the story wasn't as clear-cut as he wanted it to be. People often tell on themselves through the reactions they can't control. Trevor clenched every time responsibility drifted in his direction. He relaxed only when he was describing how others had wronged him. That contrast mattered. I asked him why the idea of therapy made him so angry. He said therapy was for people with real problems, people who needed fixing. He said he wasn't broken. He said he didn't need a stranger analyzing him. And then he said something that revealed the fear under his defiance. If I go to therapy, they'll think they were right about me. Right there. That was the crack in the armor. Trevor wasn't afraid of therapy. He was afraid of admitting imperfection. He was afraid that if he opened himself up to the possibility that he contributed to his own conflicts, the entire story, he'd been holding on to his story of being unfairly targeted, misunderstood, mistreated, might collapse. And if that story collapsed, he'd have nothing left to shield him from the pain he'd been avoiding for years. His parents weren't trying to control him, they were trying to reach him, but he couldn't tell the difference. When a person grows, used to seeing the world through a lens of hurt, even love can look like an attack. I asked Trevor to tell me what his life would look like if people treated him the way he wanted, if they respected him, listened to him, understood him. He said he wanted calm conversations. He wanted people to take his perspective seriously. He wanted conflict without hostility. He wanted relationships that didn't end in shouting or cold silence. As he spoke, I could hear the sincerity in his voice. These weren't outrageous demands. These were the desires of someone who had never learned how to create peace within himself, so he kept searching for others to create it for him. Then I asked him a harder question. I said, if you want calm conversations, are you bringing calm to the table? If you want people to listen, are you listening? If you want understanding, are you offering it first? He didn't answer. Not immediately. His lips tightened and he looked down, not in guilt, but in recognition. For the first time since he walked onto the stage, his defensiveness faltered. He wasn't ready to admit anything out loud, but something in him quieted. His mother watched him with hopeful caution. His father leaned forward slightly. They could feel a shift too. Small but real. Trevor wasn't retreating into his usual explanations. He wasn't lashing out. He wasn't deflecting. He was thinking. I knew better than to push too fast. People who cling to victimhood have fragile emotional thresholds. They can make progress 1 minute and snap back into old patterns the next. So I softened the moment instead of sharpening it. I told him that wanting to feel respected doesn't make him weak. Wanting to feel heard doesn't make him dramatic. Wanting to feel understood doesn't make him selfish. Those are human needs, not flaws. But they come with a responsibility to offer those same things to others. Trevor looked up with a mixture of frustration and something that bordered on sadness. He said, I don't try to hurt anyone, I just want to be treated fairly. And that was the closest he had come to vulnerability all day. I nodded and told him I believed him. And I did. Most people who lash out aren't trying to destroy relationships, they're trying to defend themselves using tools that never worked in the first place. Trevor wasn't malicious. He was exhausted. He was scared of being judged. He was scared of being wrong. He was scared of being exposed as someone who didn't always have control. His father said quietly that they didn't need Trevor to be perfect. They just needed him to be open. Trevor's shoulders sank just a little. Not collapsed, not defeated, just softened. He heard that sentence. He didn't reject it. He didn't twist it. He absorbed it. That was the opening we needed. I asked him if he could tell me about a moment, any moment, when he reacted before thinking. He hesitated for a long time. He tapped his foot. He rubbed his palms against his jeans. He stared at the floor. And then almost reluctantly, he described an argument with his girlfriend from 2 years earlier. He said she told him he seemed distracted. He said she wanted him to talk about what was bothering him. He said he felt cornered. He said he snapped at her for nagging. He said she left the apartment crying. For the first time, Trevor didn't follow that story with an excuse. He didn't explain why she deserved it. He didn't blame her tone or her timing or her wording. He just told the story. And then he went silent. His silence wasn't defensive this time. It was reflective. I let the moment settle because change begins in the pause after truth. When someone reaches that reflective silence, you don't rush in and fill it. You give it space, you let it breathe. That's where the shift happens, not in the talking, but in the moment a person finally hears their own story without distortion. Trevor stayed quiet longer than before, and I watched the tension in his shoulders rise and fall like waves against a shore he didn't know how to land on. He wasn't defending himself now. He wasn't rewriting events. He was simply sitting with a memory he hadn't allowed himself to examine honestly. I asked him what he thought his girlfriend felt in that moment. He said he didn't know. It wasn't defiant. It was honest. Then more quietly, he said she probably felt dismissed. He said she probably felt like he wasn't someone she could reach. And then he added something. I didn't expect something soft and small, but unbelievably important. He said, I didn't mean to make her cry. That right there was the hinge where his narrative began to shift. People who see themselves as perpetual victims rarely acknowledge the impact of their actions. But Trevor wasn't rejecting that impact anymore. He wasn't arguing that she overreacted. He wasn't talking about what she should have done differently. He was recognizing the pain he caused, maybe for the first time, without layering it in excuses. I told him that intention doesn't erase impact. You can love someone deeply and still hurt them if you don't understand your emotional triggers. You can believe you're being honest while actually being cruel. You can think you're protecting yourself when you're really pushing people away. Trevor's stare grew distant and humid at the edges, the way someone looks when they're seeing themselves clearly for the first time in years. His mother's hands shook as she listened. His father sat very still, afraid to interrupt the fragile moment unfolding in front of them. You don't break a moment like that with commentary. You let the person walk through the doorway they finally noticed. I asked Trevor why he reacted so quickly back then. He said he felt overwhelmed. He said people expected too much from him. He said that when someone asked him to talk about his feelings, he felt cornered. That was the key in his mind. Emotional intimacy was pressure. Vulnerability was danger. Honesty was exposure. So he defended himself the only way he knew how, by attacking first. I asked him where he learned to treat vulnerability like a threat. He shrugged, but it wasn't dismissive. It was searching. He said he didn't know. He said it always felt like opening up would give people a weapon. And that's when his father cleared his throat softly and said Trevor had always been that way, even as a child. He said when Trevor got hurt, even physically, he'd deny it, hide it, pretend it never happened. His mother added that any attempt to comfort him made him pull away, even when he was little. Trevor frowned, trying to remember. He said maybe he did push away. He said maybe he didn't like people seeing him upset. And then he said something that cracked the surface even more. If they see you upset, they see how to break you. That sentence didn't come from the present. It came from an old wound, one so old he didn't even know where it started. People don't talk like that unless life has taught them to equate vulnerability with danger. And once someone internalizes that lesson, they build their entire identity around avoiding emotional exposure. I told Trevor that protecting yourself is understandable, but if the armor you put on starts cutting the people around you, at some point you have to ask whether the armor is still protecting you or whether it's trapping you. His jaw shifted and he let out a breath he'd been holding for too long. He said, I don't do it on purpose. That wasn't an excuse, it was a confession. His mother quietly said, we know. Trevor looked at her for the first time without anger. It wasn't warmth, not yet, but it wasn't hostility. It was a flicker of recognition. I asked him to give me another example, a moment when he reacted before thinking. He talked about his sister's wedding. He said she didn't choose him as a groomsman. He said he felt humiliated. He said he spent months believing she was trying to send a message that he wasn't important. So he confronted her the night before the ceremony and accused her of disrespecting him. He said she cried and told him he made everything about himself. He didn't attend the wedding. When he finished telling that story, the room didn't move. His mother stared at her lap. His father blinked hard, fighting emotion. Trevor sat there, the weight of his own words settling on him like dust from a collapsed ceiling. I asked him what message his sister actually gave him. He said she told him she chose her fiance's best friends because they were a tighter group. She told him she loved him but didn't think he'd enjoy being part of the wedding party. She told him he was welcome at the ceremony and reception. I asked him what message he thinks she meant to send. He hesitated, then said she probably didn't mean to hurt him. That was the moment Trevor realized the difference between feeling hurt and being hurt. That distinction is life-changing for people who see themselves as victims. Feelings are real, but they don't always reflect the truth. Trevor had treated discomfort as proof of intentional harm his entire life. I leaned forward and told him the simplest truth of the day. You're not a victim of your family. You're a victim of your own interpretation. His eyes shimmered not with anger this time, but with something that looked like grief. You could see the story inside him wobble. Not collapse, but wobble. When a narrative someone has lived in for years starts to wobble, that's the beginning of change. His father spoke gently, telling Trevor that they had never excluded him from anything out of malice. He said they tiptoed around him for years because they were afraid of triggering another misunderstanding. Trevor's shoulders sank again, and he whispered that he didn't know people were scared of him. His mother said softly, "We weren't scared of you. We were scared of losing you." That sentence hit him harder than anything I'd said. Trevor wiped at his eyes, almost irritated at himself for the emotions slipping out. But that's what happens when someone finally stops defending and starts seeing. His voice cracked when he said he didn't want people to be afraid to talk to him. I told him that wanting connection is human, but creating connection requires self-awareness. It requires looking in the mirror. It requires noticing when you're speaking from fear instead of truth. Trevor nodded slowly, not defensively, not resentfully, just honestly, and that's when I knew he was shifting. Not completely, not magically, not instantly, but genuinely. Trevor sat there with his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. It was the posture of a man trying to hold himself together while the story he'd lived inside for years slowly unraveled thread by thread. He wasn't fighting anymore. He wasn't performing. He wasn't defending. He was simply exposed. And exposure for someone who has built their identity around self-protection is one of the most terrifying sensations in the world. I let the silence settle because he needed that moment. His parents needed it too. They had been waiting years to hear even the slightest acknowledgement from him, years of walking on eggshells, years of being blamed, years of feeling like they were losing him inch by inch. And now for the first time, Trevor wasn't pushing them away. I asked him what it felt like to hear his parents say they were afraid of losing him. He swallowed hard, staring at a point far in front of him. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. He said he didn't know they felt that way. He said he thought they were frustrated, tired of him, embarrassed by him. He said he thought they wanted distance. His mother shook her head instantly, tears falling freely now. His father's eyes glossed over. Trevor kept talking, and the words came out fractured like pieces of a truth he never dared examine. He said he thought they were disappointed in him, that every boundary they set was a judgment, that every sigh, every hesitation, every attempt to help was proof that he wasn't enough. That was the wound behind every conflict. Not arrogance, not entitlement, not manipulation. It was pain. A pain he never learned how to speak, so he let it speak for him. I leaned in and told him something he needed to hear plainly. You've been reading rejection into situations where it didn't exist. And the more you believed you were being rejected, the more you pushed people away until the distance felt real. But that distance didn't come from them. It came from your fear. He blinked slowly, and the tears that had been threatening finally gathered. He wiped them quickly, frustrated at their presence. People who avoid vulnerability often treat tears like failure. But they're not failure. They're release. His father spoke gently, telling Trevor they were never disappointed in him. that they were confused, sometimes hurt, sometimes unsure of how to help, but never disappointed. Trevor's face crumpled for a second before he forced it still again. It was the face of a man realizing he had misunderstood something essential about the people who loved him. I asked him what he wanted. Now, at this moment, sitting here with his family, finally heard, finally speaking honestly, he said he wanted things to be different. He said he wanted to stop pushing people away. He said he wanted to stop reacting before thinking. Then he said something that carried the weight of an entire childhood. I don't want to be the problem anymore. I corrected him gently. I told him he wasn't the problem. He was a person carrying old emotional scars that distorted everything around him. I told him the work wasn't about fixing who he was. It was about healing what he'd been carrying. That distinction matters. People can grow when they believe they're worth the effort. Trevor needed to believe that. His mother reached for him again just a few inches across the space. And this time, Trevor didn't look away. He stared at her hand like it was a language he didn't speak but wanted to understand. I asked him if he could take responsibility, not for the intentions he never had, but for the impact his reactions had made. He nodded slowly. He said he knew he hurt people. He said he lashed out because it felt safer than admitting he was scared. He said he pushed away the people he loved because he didn't know how to let them in. Then he said something that marked the true turning point. I don't want to live like that anymore. That wasn't a performance. I've been doing this long enough to know the difference between someone trying to say the right words and someone finally speaking their truth. Trevor wasn't polishing an image. He was unearthing a piece of himself that had been buried under years of defensiveness. I told him, change doesn't happen because you say the words. It happens because you commit to the work. And the work would mean listening before reacting, asking questions instead of assuming intentions, seeing fear for what it is, not disguising it as anger. It would mean giving people the chance to show him love before deciding they were against him. Trevor nodded again, this time with more strength. His father asked if he wanted their help going forward. For the first time, Trevor said yes. Not grudgingly, not defensively, just yes. He said he wanted to talk to a therapist not because his parents pushed him, but because he finally wanted to understand himself. He said he wanted to reach out to his sister to apologize for the wedding. He said he wanted to repair things he'd broken because he didn't want to keep losing people he cared about. That kind of honesty doesn't come from pressure. It comes from clarity. Trevor finally saw the story he'd been telling himself, and he finally saw the cracks in it, and instead of running from the truth, he reached toward it. His mother finally let out a sob, not of grief, but of relief. His father exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Trevor didn't collapse into their arms. He didn't suddenly become soft and sentimental, but he did look at them with eyes that no longer saw enemies. He saw parents who had been waiting for him on the other side of his fear. I told Trevor that this wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning. The moment someone shifts from defending their pain to understanding it is the moment transformation becomes possible. He wasn't finished growing, but he was no longer hiding from the work. When the segment wrapped, he didn't storm off the stage. He didn't retreat behind anger. He stood there quietly, taking in the moment. His mother touched his arm gently, and this time he didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He let the contact stay, small but monumental. Healing rarely arrives in grand gestures. It begins with moments like that, moments where a person lets go just enough to let love in. And in that moment, Trevor finally stepped out of the narrative that had held him prisoner for most of his life. Trevor stayed seated even after the cameras powered down, which already told me something had shifted. People who come in ready to defend every square inch of their identity usually bolt the moment the formal conversation ends, as if lingering might invite more vulnerability than they know how to tolerate. But Trevor didn't move. He sat there taking slow breaths, not in panic, but in contemplation. His parents didn't rush him either. They sensed the fragility of the moment and respected the space he needed. I walked over and sat closer to him, still giving him enough distance to breathe, but close enough that he could feel my presence. There's a delicate balance in moments like this. You don't overwhelm a person who's just learned to stop hiding. You meet them exactly where they are. Trevor rubbed his palms against his thighs, staring down, his voice quiet when he finally spoke. He said he didn't understand how things got so twisted. He said he didn't know when he started assuming the worst of everyone. He said it felt like his life had been lived behind frosted glass, shadows, shapes, movement, but nothing clear. And he admitted something profound. He said he didn't always know what was real and what was just his fear talking. That level of introspection can't be forced. It comes only when someone finally feels safe enough to look inward without flinching. His mother asked if he was upset with them. He shook his head slowly and said he wasn't. He said he thought they were against him because it was easier than believing he misread things. He said he didn't want to be the one hurting people. He didn't want to be the source of conflict. He said blaming others was easier than facing the idea that he might need to change. I told him that recognizing the truth isn't about admitting fault, it's about reclaiming power. When you decide you're not a victim of everyone else's behavior, you gain the ability to shape your own. You step out of reaction mode and into choice. Trevor nodded, absorbing the idea like water soaking into dry soil. His father asked him what he wanted to do next, and Trevor said something that surprised all of us. He said he wanted to apologize, not in a performative way, but genuinely. He said he didn't want to apologize because he was told to or because he felt cornered, but because he finally understood the impact of his actions. His mother put a hand to her mouth, overcome with emotion. His father leaned forward, elbows on his knees, listening with the intense, cautious hope of a man who's been afraid to believe in change too many times before. Trevor turned toward them. Not fully, not with the openness of someone who has everything figured out, but with the vulnerability of someone taking the first steps out of a long-held fear. He said he was sorry for the accusations, for the outbursts, for the distance he created. He said he didn't see what he was doing because he was too busy protecting himself from threats that weren't there. His mother broke down in tears, and this time Trevor didn't shut down at the emotion. He didn't recoil. He didn't tense. He let the moment happen, and he let it affect him. His father whispered that they never wanted to lose him, that they had been waiting for this day. Trevor nodded, not dramatically, but with humility. I watched the three of them sit in that shared space of truth, the walls finally lowered enough for connection to breathe. That's the thing about emotional breakthroughs. They aren't loud, they aren't flashy, they come in quiet moments where someone finally lets themselves be seen. Trevor wasn't performing now. He wasn't arguing, he wasn't justifying, he was accepting. I told Trevor that change wouldn't happen in a single day. It wouldn't happen because he said the right words or because he cried or because he felt clarity in the moment. Change would come from daily decisions to choose awareness over defensiveness, ownership over blame, curiosity over assumption. He would have setbacks, he would get triggered, he would fall into old patterns. But the difference now was that he had insight. And insight is the beginning of emotional responsibility. Trevor asked, what if he slipped up again? I told him slipping up isn't failure, it's part of the process. Failure is refusing to see the pattern. Failure is going blind to your own behavior. He wasn't blind anymore. He had turned on the lights internally, and once you do that, you can't pretend you don't see the mess. He smiled faintly, not a confident smile, but an honest one. The kind a person wears when they're stepping into unknown territory but willing to try. His mother reached for his hand again, and this time he took it, not hesitantly, not begrudgingly. He took it like someone reaching for a lifeline he wishes he'd recognized sooner. His father placed a hand on his shoulder, and Trevor didn't tense. He let the contact sit there, grounding him. I could feel the shift happening inside him. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't a flood of emotion. It was a quiet reorganization, a rewiring of how he interpreted the world around him. For people who spend years believing they're victims, the first step toward healing is realizing they're not powerless. Trevor was beginning to understand that he wasn't at the mercy of his emotions. He wasn't trapped in old patterns. He wasn't destined to keep pushing people away. He asked me what I thought caused all of this. I told him emotional patterns rarely come from one moment. They're the result of years of small misunderstandings, sensitivities that weren't supported, fears that weren't named. I told him his reactions were strategies he developed a long time ago to protect himself, but those strategies grew outdated. They started causing more harm than good. And now, as an adult, he had the opportunity to upgrade those strategies, to learn new ways of coping, new ways of relating, new ways of communicating. Trevor listened closely, absorbing every word. That's how I knew this wasn't temporary clarity. This was someone stepping into ownership. He asked if he could repair things with his sister. I told him he absolutely could. Apologies don't rewrite history, but they open the door to new chapters. His sister might need time. She might have her own wounds, but sincerity has a way of softening even the toughest edges. Trevor looked at his parents again. He said he didn't expect them to trust him immediately. He said he didn't expect everything to magically fix itself, but he wanted to earn back their confidence. He wanted to rebuild, not demand closeness, but work for it. His father said, "We're here. We've always been here." His mother nodded, still crying, but smiling through the tears. As we wrapped up, Trevor stood not abruptly, but thoughtfully. He hugged his mother first, a real hug, not the stiff, obligatory kind. Then he hugged his father. They held him tightly, and he let them. That was the moment I knew he wasn't just saying the right things, he was feeling them. When Trevor walked out of the studio, he moved differently. Not lighter exactly, but more grounded, more aware, more hopeful. He didn't walk out as a victim. He walked out as someone ready to own his life for the first time. And that's the power of seeing through your own story. When the narrative you cling to begins to crack, you can either patch it back together with blame, or you can step through the opening and meet yourself on the other side. Trevor chose the opening. He chose growth. He chose responsibility. He chose truth. And in doing so, he chose a future that wasn't dictated by fear.